So, welcome to Introduction to Western Hunting, an Armed Forces Initiative lunch and learn event. Oh man, is the video really choppy for you guys? I was really excited about it. It's kind of going. So that's footage from Alaska. We did one of our dual skills camps in Alaska this year. That's a couple of our attendees packing out caribou on the tundra. And I'm just lollygagging around behind them. Harder than it looks. Anyway, next slide. So tonight we are going to talk about, well, so first of all, how to Western hunt is going to be 3 parts. So we're going to do part 1 tonight, part 2 next Monday, and part 3 the Monday after that. They're kind of going to they're going to build on each other. So you can skip one if you want to, but it would behoove you to make it to all 3. So tonight we're going to focus on points. I know it's a really complex system, especially if you're from back east where you just go buy a license and go shoot 7 whitetails like I can in Wisconsin. So we're going to talk about bonus points, preference points, points in general, special bonus opportunities, OTC, a little bit of the North American model of wildlife conservation, how they manage big game in the West, and ideally at the end you understand how to buy points, what points you want to buy, and why you can't just go buy a hunting license and chase elk around in Montana. So off we go. Welcome to part 1, Western big game management. I took all these pictures. I'm really proud of them. So if anybody wants to drop a little compliment in the comments, that would be cool. I can only see one of you, and it's Josh, and he looks very unamused. So, Josh, you're going to have to do me a favor and laugh every once in a while. Be cool. There we go. Thanks, buddy. All right, so tonight we're talking about points. We're going to go through preference points, bonus points, when to buy points, what points to buy, and then helpful tools and tricks to help you navigate this whole process of buying points and applying for tags out west. We're also going to go through Western big game management as it fits into the North American model of wildlife conservation, to include how seasons are set, what is carrying capacity, what is over the counter, and why you should care about it. So the first one, hopefully this isn't the first time you guys have seen the North American model of wildlife conservation, but essentially this is a large, all-encompassing document that dictates how we manage wildlife as a natural resource in the United States and Canada. So it's based on 7 tenets, and each of these is much more detailed than you can read. You could spend a master's thesis studying this model, and you still wouldn't get through the whole thing, but I've broken it down really simple. These are the 7 tenets, right? So the first one, wildlife resources are conserved and held in trust for all citizens. This is meant to avoid kind of the king's deer theory that you see in Europe, especially Northwestern Europe, where the king or the government would own all that, that individual, the monarch, would own all the land, the game animals in a specific area. In the United States, wildlife is owned by all the citizens. We all have an equal right to these wildlife, but it is managed by the federal government, by the state governments, in order to provide the most resources for the most people. Number 2, commerce in dead wildlife is eliminated. Basically, this eliminates market hunting and other things like plumes was a big thing, which is like feathers from fancy birds that ladies put in hats. But what this doesn't cover, which is interesting, which if you wanted to go back on the YouTube channel, we did a whole series on trapping, on why the sale of fur from legal trapping is not included in this. Commerce in dead wildlife is eliminated. Now, the number 3, wildlife is allocated according to the democratic rule of law. Now, some folks have thought that this is kind of wrong and we should go back and address this, just because we have a lot of what is referred to, or what you'll hear of, as ballot box biology, which essentially means a bunch of folks in a state can get together and decide that they don't want to allow mountain lion hunting in Colorado. And if enough people vote on it, then you can remove that right to hunt mountain lions in that state. That's not what this is referring to. That's kind of an unforeseen side result or side effect of this number 3, right? So wildlife is allocated according to the democratic rule of law is really referring to that wildlife is allocated for the most good for the most people, right? So, and that takes different forms in different states like Arizona and Montana, dramatically different ways of managing this while still fitting into the North American model. We'll talk a little bit about that later. Number 4, wildlife will only be killed for a legitimate, non-frivolous purpose, which basically eliminates, people don't know this, but in like the 1850s, if you were a rich European nobleman, you can go on a safari to one of 2 places. You can either go to Missouri or you can go to Africa, and they're kind of like parallel in cost and like experience. Like that was the cool thing to do. Now what that ended up with is, you extirpate things like bison and black bears and and the eastern elk subspecies, and all kinds of other stuff. So wildlife may only be killed for a legitimate, non-frivolous purpose. Wildlife is an international resource. So what this does is helps countries that share a border work together to manage wildlife that don't understand that border. We talked last one of the classes on trapping was a lot about the CITES tags and how animals that cross borders or that can be found on either side of the Canadian and United States border must be tagged with a CITES tag, and it's a special regulatory system. But we see most people see this as it applies to waterfowl hunting, as the flyways extend up into Canada and down into Mexico. And if Canada wanted to put a 15 duck per person per day limit in the central flyway, those folks in the Dakotas, Nebraska, Kansas would be pretty upset about it because it would affect their hunting season, surely. So wildlife is an international resource and must be managed as such. Number 6, every person has an equal opportunity under the law to participate in hunting and fishing, which means the goal with that is that it is not for the privileged few, which we'll talk about here a little bit as well. Number 7, scientific management is the proper means for wildlife conservation. So we're going to get into what scientific management means, but essentially it means this is not about how you, Raphael, feel about the elk population in zone 57 of Montana, or how you, Stephanie, feel about how many antelope are in zone 1 in Wyoming. It is about what science says. How many collared or tagged animals do we observe? How many do we think the landscape can hold? Things like that, and that is what will set the season, science and data, not emotions and personal feelings. Moving on. If you want questions during this, there's a little hand raise button on your screen somewhere, and Raphael is going to alert me and bump in and say, hey, Josh has a question or DJ has a question, and that's fine. Just interrupt. It's the best way to go about it because I'm going to get on a roll and forget what I said. So get him quick. This is a picture of DJ, by the way. Everybody look at his butt up there. It's kind of grayed out, but what a nice looking guy. All right, so how big game seasons are set in the West. So I'm going to talk about a couple like definitions first, and then we're going to get into a kind of a hypothetical but very realistic example. And there are going to be questions. Totally fine with it. We're going to talk through as long as it takes to get it. So the first thing is we need to understand carrying capacity. So how many critters can the landscape hold responsibly? So that's to do with cover, concealment, access to water, access to food, access to calories, access to other critters, right? Because if we look at like the 3 things that deer or elk or whatever, any mammal creature wants to do, they want to eat, they want to sleep in a protected area, they want to drink water, and they want to mate with other animals of their species. So you need those 4 things, right? And that is how we determine carrying capacity. So when we split these things up into zone 1 Montana all the way through zone 272 or however many there are, each of those zones is measured independently of the other zones based on how many critters that landscape can hold, what the carrying capacity of that landscape. So now carrying capacity is not a magic one-time number that we measure every November, and that's when we measure, and that's the right answer, right? There's seasonality involved, which means if the carrying capacity is X, you're going to have an average of that, right? That's the most, right? So it's different. So let's say in January and December, winter kill is happening. Bulls going through the rut just aren't making it. They're not getting enough calories. Maybe it's a particularly hard winter, and you have a big die-off. So like a herd of 1,000 goes down to 800. Is 800 now the carrying capacity because you're going to have a die-off? Well, maybe, maybe not. It depends on years of data, not one season of data. And then we also have to remember in spring, a lot of those bulls mated in the fall. So in spring, those calves are going to get barns. So summer, you have a large group than that 850. Fall, you have different things. You have roadkill. You have all kinds of stuff. Then we go through survival rate, which is like deaths due to predation, disease, weather, anything that could kill one of these animals is measured in there, and that all feeds back into carrying capacity. Something got blanked on my screen. Okay, go.
That's for me. So I just wanted to comment, Trevor, that you're dead on this stuff. And here in Montana, we're going over some pretty significant season changes for mule deer and potentially pronghorn based on the last 2 winters. So we're seeing swift management changes in Montana based on these seasonal effects and survival rates. So you'll see just across the West, you'll see this stuff change sometimes year to year and sometimes kind of in 5-year spurts, depending on how that state's agency operates. In Montana, we're typically on a wider cycle. and they're making mid-cycle changes kind of swiftly based on what's happening the last 2 winters.
No, that's a great point, DJ. It's an evolving number. Just because your grandpa and your dad always hunted in Unit 270, and Unit 270 has always allowed for 200 bulls to be taken, doesn't mean it will always be that way. This is a flexible system designed to continually evolve based on all kinds of conditions, like the reintroduction of wolves into Colorado. That's an increase in predators that's going to have an effect. What's it called? Climate change. That's going to have an effect. Drought years, heavy rain years, heavy snow years. It's all taken into effect. The next thing I want to talk about as far as a theme is success rate. So we're going to say, we're going to get through carrying capacity. We're going to get through that. And you're going to say, okay, great. So we can afford to remove 250 mule deer in this section a year. Why are there 1,000 tags? So then we get into average success rate, which again is something that's constantly evolving as we, as the hunting and angling community, get better or worse at hunting and angling. So I looked across the West. There's some that are published, some that aren't. So I don't want you to take these as the gospel. But generally, during firearm seasons or rifle seasons, we have a 15% success rate, much higher in places like Arizona, New Mexico, but much lower in places like Montana. And then archery season, we have a 5% success rate. So if we combine that, give or take, if you were on elk tag and you're in the elk woods on public land, you have a 10% chance of success, right? And that, again, it's going to depend on the region you're in, the year, all kinds of stuff. Go ahead, DJ.
Yeah, so just to add on to this, I was just chatting with Dalton Wayne, our new communications manager, about citizen science programs. And so we talked about in the North American model how we manage based on biology, right? So we put faith in our wildlife managers and them using sound biology. And one of the things that they need back to do this season setting process accurately and appropriately for a sustainable future in this is feedback from the hunting community. So if you ever get a chance to participate in a citizen science program, do so, because it's going to help out with management. But the other thing that's really citizen science related is post-season, depending on your state or the tag that you got, you may be conducted for a survey if you don't have mandatory game checks. And it's really important for this North American model to work that we, the hunting community, participate in these surveys and provide accurate data, so that 15% or that 5% is actually more nuanced unit to unit. And we know that in Unit 1 in Arizona, for those 325 bull tags, the success rate in the archery season is closer to 60%. And that's based on good, and I'm making that 60% number up. But really that number in Unit 1 in Arizona, I know for a fact is way higher than 5%, but it's important for the managing agency to know what is real and accurate on those surveys. So I just implore everybody, when you get that survey, take it seriously and provide real honest feedback to the managing agencies so they can do their job better, so that all of our kids have the opportunities that we have today.
Yeah, thank you, DJ. And that's across the board, not just for big game hunting. Waterfowl contacts me every year. Montana calls me about how many upland birds I shot. They're very diligent. I don't know if that's random or if I'm missing something, but I get like a personal call from the biologist to talk about where I hunted, what I saw, what I shot, and I end up talking to her like 45 minutes.
Yeah, that happens in Arizona too. They do a wing survey for quail in Arizona. So you'll get an envelope, and you want to, you really want to participate in these surveys and give back accurate feedback. So anytime creel surveys for fishing, like Hub said, waterfowl trapping surveys. If your state does have mandatory check stations, check in. And these are all the tools that are going to keep this thing going for us forever.
Perfect. So the last thing I want to touch on is opportunity management versus quality management. Now, I don't like this term. I know DJ doesn't like the term, but that's, give or take, that's what they're calling it. And I don't want you to come out of here with the wrong terminology. So that's what I'm going to call it. So opportunity management versus quality management. So that tells the difference between I'm going to use Montana and Arizona as kind of diametrically opposed groups here. So Arizona focuses a lot on quality management, which means you don't necessarily have the biggest herds, but the herds you do have are super healthy. You get massive bulls, you get very healthy cows, high birth rate, really well managed smaller herds, right? And that's fine. That's why you'll have shorter seasons in those. You'll have 7-day or 14-day seasons in some of these zones because they're not focused on everybody who owns a pair of camouflage shorts getting out there chasing these elk around. It's focused on a few people that draw a tag that are going to chase high age class or high maturity level animals that will open the herd up for younger bulls to progress, younger cows, things like that. Now, take that a difference then would be look at Montana, which is very focused on opportunity management. I mean, if you look at archery, muzzleloader, rifle season, late season traditional muzzleloader tags like Montana, you can hunt elk for almost, I mean, DJ will correct me, it's like 60 something days. Like it's a lot. Then you have shoulder seasons and all kinds of stuff. And it's I don't say it's not an over-the-counter state. That's not the right term, but it is a general opportunity state, which means you do not necessarily have to draw a specific unit in Montana, especially if you're a resident. You have a lot of different areas of the state you can go. So you get a lot of folks paying in to the hunting season. They're buying tags, they're buying gear, equipment, ammunition, paying into their Pittman-Robertson taxes, right? And more people are out on the landscape. Now that's different. You do have a bigger herd of elk in Montana. Colorado uses the same system where it's very much about a lot of opportunity, and you see a difference. A big 6x6 bull elk in Montana is rarer than somebody taking a big 6x6 bull elk in Arizona. Not the number of big 6x6s, the opportunity is different. That kind of makes sense. North, south, perfect. Okay, here's another picture, DJ.
Hubs,
yeah,
even inside of states, sorry to jump in again. Inside of each state, you'll have where they're managing for quantity and they're managing for quality, right? So Arizona, you look at the difference between maybe like unit 9 or 10, which are kind of big bull units, versus 6A. And you look at the number of bull tags for the archery season in 6A, and there's a lot of elk in 6A, but the number of tags is like monstrous, and the success rate is lower. And I would say the chances of shooting, like a top scoring bull, if that's what you're after, in 6A are going to be lower than they are up in units 9 or 10. So there is even inside of each state, they're kind of managing units differently. Because Arizona wants to provide as much opportunity as they can. But in states where maybe the population density is more concentrated to a certain area, even if geographically the unit's pretty big, they'll limit that number of tags, and the quality ends up being pretty high in that case. And then Montana, like Trevor said, a lot of the state is on your general deer or elk license, or we're talking about elk here, so your general elk license, which you can buy over the counter. But then a bunch of the units are draw only, and we call those trophy units. That might not be Montana FWP's term, but that's kind of the generic terminology for it. Is you draw a tag for the bear paws or something like that. You got a better chance of coming out with a big bull on your back than a lot of the units that are on that general tag. So even in interstate, there's management kind of for both quantity or for opportunity and for quality.
Like when somebody drew a really nice tag for the Missouri Breaks, and we built a whole episode of AFI YouTube around it, and they didn't get a bull. Remember that? Remember that, DJ?
I remember that quite well, Trevor. Thank you.
Yeah, that was cool. Anyway, you can see that episode coming up, premiering at Rendezvous this year, which is our large fundraiser in Minneapolis, Minnesota, from April 18th through the 22nd. You should all buy a ticket and go. All right, let's get into our example. So I just pulled these numbers out of my head and ran it through the same system that a Western state would run it through. So we're going to look at Elk Zone Alpha, because I don't want to name drop any zone numbers, because I don't want you to even think that this is anything real. It's fake. I made it up for this example. So you have Elk Zone Alpha in the state of Pennsylvania. Carrying capacity, the scientists, biologists have decided, is 1,000 elk. Now they know the target population that they want is between 950 elk and 1,000 elk all the time. That is what the biologists in that area of this fake state, in this fake zone, have decided is the best. So we're going to go through seasonality. In January, the herd is at its annual low point, 850 elk. You've had hunting seasons come through. Elk get hit on the road. Elk get wound up in barbed wire fences trying to migrate down from the high areas. Disease, predators, all kinds of stuff. Elk is at its annual low point of 850 animals. Now, April comes through, calves are being born. The herd is now up to 1,275 elk. But again, carrying capacity is 1,000, target population is 950. So because we've decided that the carrying capacity is 1,000 based on nutrients, available area, all kinds of stuff, that means the additional 275 elk are either going to have to push into zones to their left, right, north, south of them, or they're going to die anyway because we can only support 1,000 elk in this zone alpha. July, we have some predation. A lot of those elk calves are not are easy pickings for grizzlies and wolves and mountain lions and all kinds of stuff. So predation, disease, vehicle strike, the herd's going to get down to 1,100. Now, September, December, we're going to have human hunting season. In this fictional area, we have a 10% success rate. So in order to fill the 10%, or in order to fill the 100 tags that we want, we need to issue 1,000 tags because only 10% of those tags are going to get filled. And we know this because of historical data. Wildlife predators, so wolves, bears, wildcats, wounded elk, wounded elk by hunters that are not recovered. Wolves are going to eliminate an additional, we're going to call that 150 elk. So then we'll get back to January and the herd is back at its annual low point of 850. So this is like a really clean example of what we're looking at when we talk about carrying capacity, and then looking based on carrying capacity, we talk about how to assign that hunting season. So we know that we want, if everything else goes according to averages, which law of averages, it's never going to be perfect. If everything goes to the law of averages, we know we can take 100 elk off of this mountain or out of this zone. So we know 10% tags get filled, issue 1,000 tags. Now, some years it's going to be a really mild winter and elk hunters are just going to get after it, or maybe the bulls are going to be particularly fired up during September and the archery guys are going to be on it. And instead of filling 100 of the 1,000 tags, we're going to fill 300. All right. Then the next year we could adjust, or the next 3 years based on how often they are studying the carrying capacity, we can adjust and offer more or less tags, and we'll adjust that success rate like DJ talked about earlier based on surveys. So it's an ever evolving system, but this is why when you draw an elk tag for whatever in Arizona, there's only 87 tags given out in that zone, right? Or same in Colorado, same in Wyoming, same in Idaho, Alaska, wherever. And they do this for everything, right? This isn't just elk. This is mule deer. This is antelope. They even manage black bears this way, mountain lions. Like, it is all based on data. I'm going to move on because nobody's pausing me to stop about questions. All right. So that's the general rule that all the states, no matter whether east or west, go off of, but particularly in the west. So what we're going to be talking about specifically for the rest of the, whatever we have, an hour, half an hour left. We're going to talk about Montana. We're going to talk about Washington, Idaho, Wyoming, Colorado, Alaska, New Mexico, and Arizona. Now, some of these states I have a ton of information on. Some of these states I don't have a lot of information on. I know that I have personally hunted everything but Washington on this list. So I have a little bit of firsthand knowledge. I know between DJ and Stephanie and some of the other board members, they've covered the whole gambit here. And it's we have a lot of information to give you. So here we go. All right. So the thing was, what are points? So there's two kinds of points. Like, I'm just going to say things, and if you want to call me out for them being slightly incorrect, that's fine. I'm going to give you a base of information. There's two kinds of points. There are preference points, and there are bonus points. So you're going to get, don't try and like copy and paste or screenshot the slide. You're going to get copies of the slide. It's all going to go on YouTube. You're going to get the information, so don't freak out trying to take notes. Preference points. Preference points are a very simple system of drawing those applications with the most points first. And then if all the people with the most points are selected, the remaining tags move on to those with fewer points. So if we have an area for bighorn sheep in Colorado, we're going to call it Area 17. I don't even know if that's a bighorn unit. Area 17 has 100 bighorn sheep in it, but you have 1,000 people apply to hunt there. You're going to have people building up points because they're only going to draw 100 out of those 1,000 every year. So 30 years later, you have folks with 30 years worth of points built up because they buy a point every year, where basically they get a point because they didn't draw. So then the folks with 30 points will draw. And if they fill all the people with 30 points, like let's say there's 75 people with 30 points, all 75 get a tag, then they'll go down to the folks with 29 points and give those remaining 25 tags to those folks. It gets simpler. Bonus points are a lot more fun. I like bonus point system. They're a little complex, but that's what makes it kind of wild and crazy, and it feels more like gambling if that's something you're into. Bonus points. Every hunter who applies for a license or permit, depending on what the state calls it, gets one chance in the drawing. A bonus points let you add to those chances. So if you think of a bonus point, it's like an extra raffle ticket. So you buy an application or you buy a permit, a license, whatever that state calls it, you get the name Trevor Hubbs in the pool that they're going to draw from. Big glass fish jar, people's going to run their hands through it and pull it out. It's probably an electronic system in real life, but that's a good way to think of it. Now, a bonus point is every year you can buy a bonus point. So in addition to your one license, you get an extra, or your one name in the bucket, you get an extra name in the bucket. So now out of 100 names in the bucket, you're in there twice if you have 2 points, but so is everybody else who has 2 bonus points, right? Now, the number of raffle tickets or points you have in the drawing goes up with each number you have. And then again, some states cube or square these points. So if you have 3 actual points, they square or they cube them. Now you have 9. And it just gets kind of crazy, but it makes it a lot more fun. Bonus points are not, I got a slide on it. So biggest difference, in a bonus point state, everyone has a chance, but those with more points have more of a chance, right? So if we're in that fish jar or fish bowl with 100 tickets in there, and your name's only in there once, and everybody else's name is in there 10 times, sure, everybody else has a little bit better chance, but you still have a chance. Wyoming works like this, and I really like Wyoming. Nothing against Arizona or any of the other places, but it's fun because you always have a shot. Now, the difference between that and a preference point is only those with the most points get drawn, except for Wyoming, who, while has a preference point system, is a little bit of a bonusy, kind of a wonky deal. And Ellis is going to talk about that later because he's a former state trooper in that area / game warden / I don't know what the official title is. So I'm going to call on you, Ellis. Don't worry. You don't have to jump in unprepared. So what states uses what? States with bonus points, Montana, Arizona. States with preference points, Montana, Wyoming, Colorado. You see Montana is in both columns. That's because Montana has both preference points and bonus points depending on what you're buying. So as a non-resident, Montana has preference points. So I have to have a preference point to even buy a hunting license for big game in Montana. But once I get through the preference point draw to get a hunting license, I can use bonus points to apply for specific regions and specific critters in specific zones. Clear as mud, right? Great. So let's break it down a little further. So in Montana, your bonus points are squared. So let's say you are a resident of Montana. You have 10 bonus points that you've bought over the years for mountain goat. All right, so your 10 bonus points are squared, which is 10 times 100, means you have 100 bonus points. So plus your 1 extra bonus point that you get for putting your application in that year. So if you have 10 bonus points, you get actually 101 raffle tickets for the drawing, 100 for your squared points and 1 for your new current application. Now, preference points are for non-residents only, and that's just to get in either a non-resident elk license, non-resident deer license, or a non-resident combo license. Personally, I always do the combo license because I'm out in Montana for work, give or take 3 or 4 times, and whether I'm in a mule deer or an elk zone, I like to know that I'll have something to do if the oddball chance that I get off work early. So preference points in Montana for non-residents getting a hunting license, if you put in every year for 3 years, you're going to draw. As they sit right now, like there's not a huge waiting period. I've drawn with 2 years worth of points every time. Fun fact. All right, let's see. Wyoming. So this is going to get complicated. I'm going to ask Ellis to jump in here after I mess it up. All right. In the draw for Wyoming critters, there is 75% of the available licenses in each hunting area and each license type. What we mean by license type is like a bull or a buck tag versus a type B, which would be a cow or a calf tag. And Wyoming, they go through like 7 different types of licenses. Each one of those, 75% of available license in each hunt area and license type will be allocated in the preference point drawing. In Wyoming, preference points rank applicants. The remaining 25% of available licenses will be allocated on a random drawing regardless of preference points. So what that means is 75% are going to go of all the points. There's 100 licenses available in Zone 7 for antelope. 75%, 75 of those 100 are going to go to people with the most preference points. But 25 of that 100 is going to be random draw. That's why I said earlier that Wyoming's a little wonky. Am I right so far, Ellis?
Yeah, you're correct. And I know everybody hear me okay too. So yeah, Wyoming's a little weird. Obviously, we're mostly talking non-resident stuff here, because in Wyoming, residents don't have to deal with preference points except for bighorn sheep and moose. But yeah, Trevor's right. 75% the points, the rest random. So I don't want to go too far in the weeds with Wyoming, but there's a significant portion of the overall licenses that by statute, by state law, are reserved for residents only. And that was a recent law change on there. So, but yeah, Trevor, you're on the right path there.
No, thank you. Thank you, Ellis. Feel free to jump in whenever I mess something up. But no, he's right. So I want to say it is 90% of the total only go to residents. And the other 10% will go to non-residents. So some folks get all worked up about it, rightfully so. I'm not going to tell you to not get worked up about it. I don't pay Wyoming state taxes, so I don't necessarily have the same amount of say as a resident would say on how they spend that money, including their habitat money. That said, you can see the other side of the argument where as a non-resident, I'm spending more for tags. I'm spending my money at hotels, local sporting goods stores, gas stations, so maybe I should get more than 10%. It's an argument that is going to go back and forth for really the next decade, if not longer. I encourage you to join in on whatever side you choose to be on. Make your voice heard. Get involved in conservation. Also, if you are a member of the military community, that's veteran, active duty, National Guard, Reserves, or Gold Star family, and you'd like to try and hunt antelope for the first time and learn how, we do have an event coming up in October, sponsored by Weatherby, where you could come out to northeastern Wyoming, and if you get drawn for this hunt, you can take a shot at it. You're going to learn a bunch of stuff, hang out with some cool people. So head over to the AFI website for that. Next, we're going to talk about Colorado. So Colorado preference points increase your chances of drawing limited licenses. So Colorado Parks and Wildlife awards preference points by species. So when you don't draw your first hunt choice, so what that means is when you put in for a hunt, like let's say I'm going to put in for a Colorado mule deer tag, I get 3 options for the type of tag and the area I want to draw in. So if I don't draw my first choice, I get a preference point, except with desert bighorn sheep. But let's say I put in for unit 200 mule deer as my first choice, and then I have unit 7 and then unit 2 or whatever as my second and third choice. I don't draw that unit 200, I get a preference point automatically, even if I draw in the unit 7 or 2, which were my second and third choices, right? Which is kind of cool. So a good way to build up points in Colorado and still try and hunt every year is to put in for your target, like the best point or the best unit by harvest rate or however you want to measure it as your first choice, where maybe you won't get drawn, but if you do get drawn, it's going to be an amazing hunt. And then as your second and third choice, put in for a region that takes not necessarily over the counter, but you have a much higher chance of drawing, right? Because they're going to give you a preference point anyway. Now, points cannot be used in the same year they are earned, which means if somehow you got a preference point in May during the application period, you can't go ahead and use that in August for some other kind of weird draw, right? And it shouldn't really work out that way. It would have to be an extenuating circumstance to even try in Colorado. But if for some reason you run into an extenuating circumstance, you can't do that. All right, Arizona. It's hard to understand. So Stephanie, you're from Arizona. DJ spent a lot of time in Arizona. The bonus point system grants an applicant 1 random number entry for each bonus point that has been accumulated into the drawing for that species. An accumulated credit or point that authorizes the department to issue a big game drawing applicant additional computer-generated random numbers during the draw. The bonus point system grants an applicant 1 random number entry for each bonus point that has been accumulated into the drawing for that species. Each bonus point random number entry is addition to the application random number entry itself. This system provides applicants with an added chance of receiving a low random number in the draw, hence improving their draw odds while still providing a chance, no matter how small, for any applicant to get drawn. So that's why we said Arizona is technically a bonus point state, although you can see this is hard to understand. So I'm going to run through this. They are going to start at, well, let me see here. What's the best way to describe this in a much simpler way? You get your bonus point, but instead of that bonus point being you put in for your bonus points, you have 10 bonus points. But instead of those 10 bonus points just being your name in the raffle over and over again 10 times, your name plus your names for your 10 points are all going to be assigned a random number. And then the likelihood that one of those random numbers is low enough to get drawn, because they start with the low numbers and they work to the high numbers for each unit, it's higher. So you still get more of a chance to draw the more points you have, but it's not necessarily like, well, I have 10 points, so I'm in there 100 times. It's, I have 10 points, so I have 10 sets of really goofy numbers, some of which might be really low that I could draw on. That's super complicated and seems more difficult than it needs to be, but I'm not an Arizona resident and I don't get to vote on those things. So that's the way it's going to be. All right, now we're going to go through lottery draw states. Lottery draw are my most favorite because it really is no holds bar. You could put in for whatever you want and you could get it. It'd be pretty cool. So Alaska draw system is straightforward and fair when distributing permits. Both resident and non-resident hunters have an equal chance of drawing. There is no bonus. There is no preference. It is a true lottery every year, which means if you buy the Alaska, stop it. Sorry, my dogs are running around being jerks. So if you buy an Alaska hunting license, whether as a resident or a non-resident, and you put in for elk on Afognak Island, or moose in Region 52, or caribou on the north slope of the Brooks Range, it is an equal draw system for everything. Now, there's also in Alaska over-the-counter areas, which is OTC. We're going to talk about that in a second. But that is literally, you just go on the website, buy your hunting license, and buy your license for caribou, moose, or whatever in the zone you want, as long as that zone offers an over-the-counter system. Now, that's what makes it really cool about Alaska. Now, how they get you, because you're right thinking, well, that's too good to be true. The non-resident hunting license is expensive. Same with Idaho, same with New Mexico. You're talking a couple $100. Not crazy, but to even get into these draws, you have to buy that base hunting license, whether you're planning on going hunting out there or not. So if you're one of those people that wants to buy all over the West, you look based on these 3 states, you're buying 3 licenses that you may or may not use just to get into the controlled hunt or the lottery system to draw. Go ahead, DJ.
That's most states in the West. You've got to buy your license before you can put in for a draw.
Yeah.
So yes, these 3 states, but almost every state in the West, unless you're specifically buying a bonus point. I think there are some states that if you don't want to put in for a draw, but you do know that you want a bonus point, you can purchase a bonus point. But don't quote me on that or ask me which states those are.
No, Colorado and Wyoming are both that way, DJ. You are correct.
Okay.
But the difference is if I knew that, hey, region 200 in Colorado with 5 points, I am always going to draw. I am 100% guaranteed to draw a mule deer tag. I don't have a problem buying that hunting license in order to put in for that because I know I have the points. But with these lottery states, I have no idea if I'm going to draw. It is truly random.
Yeah,
so I'm committing that $200.
Or to build your points up, like in Arizona, for example, and especially, and this isn't to turn anybody off from trying to build up bonus points, right? But if you, let's say you start racking up desert bighorn points in Arizona, in order to keep those bonus points, if you go, I think it's 3 years in Arizona without applying or purchasing a bonus point, you lose all your bonus points. And if you were a non-resident of Arizona and you need to purchase a hunting license every year that you're applying, you got to kind of, unless you're made out of money, you got to kind of, for a guy like me, I got to pick and choose what states I'm applying for based on purchasing a hunting license in multiple states every year.
Yeah.
But then the flip side of that is this is how these state agencies are funding themselves and why we have quality wildlife management.
Absolutely.
So it's a big balancing act. And so this is by no means a complaint on my part, just for if you're brand new to these systems and applying for bonus points, a heads up, start making your plans for years out in some of these states that have more difficult draws.
Yeah, 100% true, DJ. And I know by this point, you're probably like, Trevor, this is way too complicated. I'm just not going to go hunt elk, or I'm going to call an outfitter and do it through them. That's fair. But let me finish before you make that decision. So let's talk about New Mexico real quick. New Mexico, the big game draw is subject to a quota system, which means that 84% of the licenses for each hunt, which is for each species in each zone, only go to New Mexico residents. Excuse me. Now, 10% go to residents or non-residents who contracted with an outfitter, and 6% go to non-residents who have not contracted with an outfitter. Now, this doesn't mean if you're a non-resident and you don't contract with an outfitter, but you still draw in that 6% chance you have, you can go to an outfitter later. You can still do that. Now, this has been an area of contention. If you want to learn BHA's stance, you can go to our policy section on the website and look at what our new New Mexico chapter and our coordinator down there, Katie DiLorenzo, who has since been promoted to conservation manager for the West, or conservation field manager. I don't know what her title is, but she's great. She's very well educated on this issue. Next, so all drawing applications are randomly assigned a sequence number, kind of like Arizona. A computer program then examines each application in the sequence in its entirety prior to moving on to the next application. When an application is examined, the computer attempts to fulfill the first hunt choice, subject to the quotas described above. If that first hunt choice is not available, meaning all those licenses have already gone out, the computer will go to the second choice and then to the third choice. So it's very similar to Arizona, except that it is truly a lottery draw. So what's neat about New Mexico is you spend a couple $100 on their non-resident license, and then the sky's the limit for what you want to put in for. Again, it is random, but it's pretty neat. Like if you want to hunt ibex, there's ibex in New Mexico. If you want to hunt javelina, there's javelina. What I like to do with New Mexico, and this is just me, feel free to take this advice or don't, is I think javelina are cool. I think mule deer are cool. I think coues deer are cool. I can apply for those and buy a license. And if I don't get them, I don't get them. But I have that license, so I can still go down there and I can hunt quail and I can hunt other small game on that regular license. So I'm not wasting my money by buying a non-resident license, because it just means an extra opportunity for me to go down with my dogs and chase other things that aren't big game. That said, New Mexico is really cool. I'm not trying to turn you off to it because of the 6% likelihood that you will draw, because you will still find stuff to draw. So let's move on. So what points to buy? Go ahead, DJ. Go ahead, Ellis.
Yeah, again, I don't want to get into the weeds of the outfitter thing, but Wyoming doesn't come out and say it necessarily, but Wyoming, I think, is the only western state with that weird rule of wilderness areas. You have to be accompanied by either a Wyoming resident or an outfitter. So there are tags there. Again, they won't say this outright, but if that unit is predominantly wilderness, then you basically need to either know somebody there or you'll be paying an outfitter if you want to hunt that. So just something to keep in mind on that end.
Yeah. No, that's a great point, Ellis.
Ellis,
go ahead, DJ.
I'm super glad you brought that up. So that's true for Wyoming. And then Alaska, for non-residents, has laws regarding bighorn sheep, mountain goat, and I believe grizzly bear or brown bear. You are required to go with an outfitter for those 3 species if you are a non-resident or you do not have a family member who is a resident. So if I had a brother that lived in Juneau, I could go hunt with my brother for one of those 3 species if I drew the tag. However, as a non-resident without family in Alaska, just like wilderness areas in Wyoming, you will need to contract an outfitter to hunt those 3 species. And Alaska Game and Fish Department looks at that as a safety hazard, to send non-residents and unfamiliar folks into the kind of country where their sheep, goats, and brown bears live, that they want you to have an outfitter with you, so that they know there's someone experienced with you in the field and you're not going up there on a suicide mission.
Nope, that's a great point to call out, both of you, Ellis and DJ. Thank you for including that. So now I'm going to go through. Go ahead. Who's next?
Sorry, quick question in the chat for DJ specifically, from Josh. Did Montana increase the percentage of outfitter tags a couple years ago?
We don't technically have outfitter tags. There are outfitters that are licensed for certain areas, and the quotas on those areas are allocated per outfitter per carrying capacity in those units. But to my knowledge, we didn't do any. There might have been increases, like let's say you're going to go into the Bob from the east side with Mills Wilderness Adventure, just because I'm familiar, right? So if their outfitted area in the Bob, and I don't know what unit they have in there, if carrying capacity is just way up, or those numbers in those units are just booming right now, they may have had more tags allocated to them on their outfitter permit, but we don't technically have outfitter tags as far as like guaranteed tags, to my knowledge. I don't know. I've never hunted with an outfitter in Montana, so maybe I'm missing something there. I see a hand up. Did you ask the question?
Yeah, so yeah, a couple of years ago, I know there was some legislation that was going to, for the non-residents, allocate more of the tag. Like, so if I put in as a party, for general out tag, they were going to readjust it. There were going to be more tags that went toward outfitters. It was in legislation. I didn't know if it passed or not. Mainly because if we hunt by ourselves, it would, it'd give us less opportunity. I was just wondering.
So I don't think that anything is, and I'll take that as a lookup, for sure. And I'll put your email in the chat, and I'll get back to you if I can find any concrete information on that. And I'll look into it. But I just don't know enough about hunting with outfitters in Montana to see where that's gone anywhere. But okay, Josh, I see your email in there. I'll get back on that.
Thank you, DJ. All right, so now we're going to go over what points to buy. So they're going to do this by state. And again, I'm not telling you to go spend all your money on points, but if you wanted to buy points, these are what are available to buy. Montana, you have a non-resident hunting license preference point. So that is just putting in to draw a hunting license for big game in Montana. Now, if you just wanted to go hunt small game or turkeys, you can do that over the counter. No big deal. But for big game, elk, mule deer, you need a non-resident big game hunting license, which you can draw with no points. You could definitely draw with 2 points. You should never need more than 3. If you use 3, you're probably just really unlucky. Then you need species-specific points for special draws. So if you draw your non-resident big game hunting license in Montana, you can go chase elk and mule deer if you did the combo on any of the open general management units. Now, you could also, once you draw your big game hunting license, you could put in for specific, what DJ called trophy units earlier than this conversation. You put in for those specific units using species-specific bonus points. So you could buy those at the same time that you buy your hunting license. We're going to go over when to buy in a little bit. Arizona, you have species bonus points. So for all the species that are in Arizona, you can buy an individual bonus point for each one. Wyoming, species-specific preference points. So different system, same deal. You're going to buy antelope, mule deer, elk, bighorn sheep, moose, mountain goat. I don't think they have desert bighorns in Wyoming, but if they did, you could buy that too, and that's a species-specific preference point. Colorado, same thing. Next. So when to buy points. This is a big one. So the reason we're doing this class now is because the time to buy points is coming up. As a non-resident hunting date in Montana, you need to put in for a hunting license by April 1st. So you have a little over 2 weeks to do that as a non-resident. Now, for your special points, for deer and elk, you have till April 1st. For moose, bighorn, sheep, and mountain goat, you have till May 1st. And for antelope, you have until June 1st. So that ideal, these are the last dates they are accepted. So, if it says it's due April 1st, get it in by March 29th or 30th. Like, don't take any chances. Arizona, for elk and antelope, you have between January 10th and February 6th to put those in. For deer, sheep, and bison, you have from February 15th to June 4th. For turkey and javelina, September 15th through October 15th. Now, Arizona is a little different there. So in Arizona, you also have a spring bison, a fall bison, a spring javelina, and a fall javelina. So if you're looking to extend your opportunities, you put in for spring javelina in October, and you put in for fall javelina in the springtime sometime. So head over to Arizona's, the website's in the slideshow earlier. Just go back a few slides and look at it. But it's one of those things. Javelina is just cool. So if you're down there anyway, or if you're looking to go down there and hunt quail, put in for a javelina license. pretty neat. All right, Wyoming, you have species hunting allocation tag application. So antelope, deer, and elk need to be in by May 31st. So if you get drawn to go on this Learn to Hunt Antelope camp later this year, then you are going to need to put your application in by May 31st, which is really April 30th, or whatever the last day of April is. Now for moose, goat, bison, and sheep, those need to be in by April 30th as well. Our point date, which is to, so it's just buy points. In Wyoming, you can't just go in and buy points while you're putting in for stuff. So if you just wanted to buy points, which means you're not submitting an application to draw an antelope tag or a deer tag, you're just going in to buy a point with no intention of hunting this year, you can't do that until July 1st to October 31st, because you can't use that point that year, remember. Now, Colorado, between March 1st and April 2nd, you can buy licenses. The species-specific points between March 1st and April 2nd at 8 p.m. Mountain Time. That is for everything. Now, there's a secondary draw June 20th through the 28th. So, by the way, we have a kind of a DIY / semi-guided outfitted or semi-outfitted hunt for bear coming up as an auction item at Rendezvous. It is in Colorado. There's a high number of cinnamon-faced bears in western part of the state where this event is happening. Not event. This, if you win, it's a auction. But so you'll have to put in for that secondary draw between June 20th and 28th. But in a lot of cases in Colorado, depending on the species and the zone, they don't end up giving enough tags away in the, knock it off, boys, in the draw. So then they have over-the-counter licenses available at August 6th at 9 a.m. Mountain Time, which means, let's say in Zone 72, which is not the zone it's in Zone 72, they have 100 bear tags, and they only have 50 people apply for this special draw. They give all 50 of those people a tag, and then they list the other 50 tags that are available as an over-the-counter license starting on August 6th. All right, over-the-counter. What states offer this option? OTC means over-the-counter. It means a option where there is either a high number of tags or literally unlimited tags for this option. So Colorado has kind of been famous for that, for over-the-counter archery elk. No matter where you're at in the country, come on over to Colorado. You can buy a hunting license and an elk tag at a gas station for archery season. Now that is going away in the future. If you're interested, BHA has a great article up on the website under the blog section. You can look at what's happening in Colorado. That's run by Brian, who's our coordinator over there, and he's a Marine Corps veteran, does great work. Alaska, over-the-counter is first come, first serve. So yes, making up a zone again, Zone 12 for caribou, there's 200 tags available, and we're going to sell them all over the counter. You don't have to apply or anything. But once those 212 are gone, they're gone. So Idaho, same way. Like technically, yes, over the counter, but once those number of licenses for that zone or that species or whatever are gone, they're just gone. So it's not an unlimited opportunity, but it is something you don't have to apply for. You could just go buy in theory. Now, for Wyoming, Montana, there's extenuating circumstances, which means there's a lot of areas with easy to draw tags, but they still do require a draw. Like DJ and I worked on this, was Zone 7 for antelope, which I'm not betraying anybody's secret spot. It's the entire eastern quarter of the state, right? Give or take. You can draw this with no points, and then sometimes you have to have one, sometimes you have to have two, but DJ drew with no points 2 years in a row once, right? Pretty close to that. So same thing can happen in Wyoming, where, like, let's talk about Region 7 in Wyoming for antelope. You have, I think they have 900 tags available because there's very little public land, and there is a lot of antelope, but there's very little public land. So 900 tags available. So they don't normally have 900 people apply, which means if you apply or you can go buy one, technically not over the counter, it's still a draw, but it's very easy to draw. So sometimes, the reason I mention this is folks will describe an area or a region or zone or whatever as an over the counter area, even though it is technically a draw. So if you hear that, that's what they're talking about. Super tag. So you're going to go home, you're going to get really into all this. Sorry, I'm going to have to hold one of my dogs so he's not eating the other dog. But so you're going to go home, you're going to look at Wyoming, you're going to look at Montana, you're going to look at Colorado, all this stuff, and you're going to see little advertisements popping up for a super tag. What is a super tag? A super tag is like a super special lottery, kind of like it's a special hunting license that's awarded by lottery that allows winners to hunt in any hunting district within the state, including famous limited entry trophy areas. So there'll be like a super antelope tag, which will give you an antelope. If drawn, you get an antelope license to use in any of the areas. So if you wanted to use that antelope license in Unit 3, which normally takes 9 points to draw, because you have a super tag, you don't need 9 points. You can just go do it. If you have the super mule deer, same thing, super elk, super moose, bighorn sheep, all kinds of stuff. It's just an extra opportunity that costs more than a regular bonus point, and you have a lot less likelihood of drawing, but it's still fun to do. You throw money at it, and it's like, oh, if I win, it's really cool. But that's what super tag is. So when you see that, you know what it is. And that is the end of section 1. So if we get into next week, we're going to be talking about planning. We'll talk packing lists. We'll talk where to hunt, how to figure out how to hunt, all kinds of other fun details that will help you get started here. But went a little long. We're at 57 minutes since we started. But yeah, feel free to shoot any questions. And if nobody has any, I have some bonus information I can give out. Go ahead, DJ.
So on that super tag thing, that can be kind of contentious for some people. States will have a raffle super tag, sometimes an auction super tag, sometimes both. And those tags, right, it'll be 1 or 2 tags per species in some cases, and every state does it a little bit different, but they use that as a significant funding stream into the state agency. For example, the Arizona, they call it the unlimited tag in Arizona instead of the super tag, like it might be in some other states, has sold for the auction tag has sold for upwards of $250,000. And that's like a huge injection of money into Arizona Game and Fish. So it's controversial for some folks, and this is putting this out there for people to think about. You can make up your own opinion. The controversy with it is that Trevor said in the beginning that wildlife is held in the public trust and it shall be allocated in a democratic process, meaning that I've got the same equitable chance of drawing a tag as any other resident of a certain state, or of any same chance as any non-resident of another state, that we allocate that democratically. And then here, contradicting that, Arizona Game and Fish is going to sell a single elk tag to the highest bidder. So that's just something to think about when you see those super tags or those auction tags. The pro is that sometimes those handful of tags will generate $1 million for an agency in a single year. And then the con is that it can be controversial when we look at the North American model and then we're monetizing a single tag. So just something to think about. I'll stop there.
No, that's a great point, DJ. It's important that people realize any potential controversy around something. Ellis, you had your hand up?
Yeah, and I should have raised it on a slide or two before about the over-the-counter thing, but just so everyone understands Wyoming's system. So obviously you have your draw, right, for the tags and preference points, all that. There's always stuff left over from the draw, right, that people don't draw or that there isn't enough interest in or whatever. Then there's a leftover draw after the initial draw, and then after the leftover draw, there is over-the-counter opportunity in Wyoming. It's not called that, but you can go, to Sportsman's Warehouse and ask, hey, can I see the leftover list? And they'll show you, what's still available. Usually it's only private land, like antelope, or sometimes weird whitetail tags, like your elk, mule deer. A lot of those are not going to have any leftovers. But there is that opportunity. Like if you go to Wyoming and you tag out your first day and you're like, man, I'd like to see if maybe I could go shoot a doe antelope. That opportunity could be available to you over the counter. You just got to go in and ask. Some years there's a lot of leftovers, some years there's not, but that does exist. So.
Yeah, that's a great point, Ellis. All right, so now I have some top secret information that we're going to stop the recording on because shame on you if you're watching this on YouTube and you didn't tune into the live one. And you're not going to get this top secret information. This is only for live. So Raphael, go. All right, DJ, you want to do last tip? Fine.
Yeah,
go,
I
want
to plug one more thing. So Trevor laid out some really great information and some basics on this stuff. If you're from the Midwest or from the East, and you've never hunted Western big game, and no matter where in the West you're going to hunt, you're going to do so on a non-resident basis. My recommendation for a place to cut your teeth and kind of learn how to navigate these systems and how to trip plan and get all of the logistical bugs out of the way in a low risk fashion would be to apply for and hunt javelina in Arizona. It's going to be about your least expensive barrier to entry. You're going to wind up in Arizona in January or February, which are about the most tolerable months in that miserable state. The desert's beautiful that time of year, and your chance of your draw odds are going to be pretty good. And honestly, once you can figure out how to see them when they're right under your nose, javelina are a pretty easy game to chase. So that's a really great opportunity. The financial risk is a couple of $100 once you've got your tag and your hunting license. I think all in, you're going to be under $300. I haven't looked at Arizona's pricing for the 2024 season yet. But that's a great place to start cutting your teeth, figure out all of the logistics on this, and do so without a lot of financial risk. So that's my last plug. I'm done.
All right. Thank you, DJ. That's a free one. All right. Raphael, cut the recording.